Right, okay, welcome, welcome, welcome. I want to welcome you to the Malthus Institute. Today we are really very, very happy, very proud to see all of you who are here. We have an outstanding speaker today, and we want to make sure that he knows the Germantown community and be a part of this wonderful event that we have here at the Malthus Institute at 5535 Germantown Avenue. We are very, very, very pleased. We are an independent think tank supported by the African American community, and we always say that we have a great desire, always a great desire to tell the truth to our community, and that's what we have been doing since 2012. But today we have Dr. Tukufu Zuberi, who is the Lazary Family Professor of Race Relations and Professor of Sociology and Africana Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. Some of you, of course, know of him. Dr. Zuberi has been a visiting professor at Makerere University in Kampala, Uganda, the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, University Daje Federal de Minas Gerais in Belo Horizonte, Brazil, University of Brasilia in Brasilia, Brazil, and the Federal University of Bahia in Salvador. He was the founding director of and director of the Center for Africana Studies at University of Pennsylvania. He served as the chair of the Department of Sociology at the University of Pennsylvania from 2007 to 2013. His publications include Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, The Mortality Cost of Colonizing Liberia in the 19th Century. I don't know about that book, but that's a book I really am interested in. I just gave the bicentennial address in Liberia last year, and it's very 2 years ago, I guess it was, in 2022, and I should have read that book before I did that. He's also published Thicker Than Blood, How Racial Statistics Lie. He's also published Más espeso que la sangre, La mentira del análisis estadístico según teorías biológicas de la raza. My Portuguese or Spanish is very bad, you know what I'm saying? In Colombia. Africa Independence, How Africa Shapes the World. Independencia Africana, Como Africa Contemporânea Redefine o Mundo in Brazil. Black Bodies in Propaganda, Fighting for Freedom, Art, War, and Black Bodies. And then Maker to Museum, The Demography of Race, Barbarity, and Humanity. He's also published around 100 articles. This brother is big. His work is significant and important. He curated Tides of Freedom, African Presence on the Delaware at the Independence Seaport Museum, which premiered in May 2013. He produced and directed 5 interstitials for inclusion in the Tides of Freedom Gallery. His exhibition, Black Bodies in Propaganda, The Art of the War poster, premiered at the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. And you can find many documentaries and related work on his collection and the PBS History Detectives. He was, you remember the History Detective? That was him. This is the brother right here, sitting right here, you see. Professor Zuberi curated the redesign of the Penn Museum Africa Gallery. Africa Galleries from Maker to Museum, opened in November 2019. He directed 10 interstitials for inclusion in the Africa Galleries, maker of the Museum Gallery. He is curating his 5th exhibition entitled Fighting for Freedom, Art, War, and Black Bodies. It will premiere at the Penn Museum in August of 2025. From the Penn Museum, it will travel to Brazil, Cuba, and South Africa. This brother has done a lot of work. He was the host of the Public Broadcasting System series History Detectives from 2003 to 2014. And my sister-in-law, she would not miss it. She loved the, if she's listening today, she loved the History Detective, and she misses it, I'm sure. Special investigations. After his experience at PBS, he has been making independent documentaries to accompany his exhibitions and other creative expressions. His first documentary was on African independence. His most recent short documentary on African material culture in museums is entitled Decolonizing the Narrative, African Galleries from Maker to Museum, and another full-length documentary on a part of West Africa before European colonization, before things fell apart. The first in a series of 3 short documentaries, Africa Galleries from Maker to Museum, is a 33-minute exploration of the debates about museums, reparations, restitutions, and race. The reason I gave you all of that is because sometimes when we introduce our speakers, we shortchange them. We don't know, and people don't, sometimes, because people used to invite me to speak and they say, well, I know him. And he's just a friend of mine, Dr. Molefi Asante. And the people in the audience have no idea of all the things that a person has done. And that's why I always make sure that I let you know who it is that's speaking. This brother is not just speaking off the cuff. I remember in a documentary that my son made, he made an important statement that sticks with me to this day. He was talking about the incarceration of black people in the United States of America and how many black people have been incarcerated. And one of the things that he said was that you can't incarcerate so many black people in this country and then turn around and say slavery doesn't exist anymore. That is indeed the enslavement of black people. So I'm honored and I'm delighted to be here with you and to be able to introduce a good brother, my friend, and colleague, and we've worked together over the years. And I want to introduce him to you. He is the leading African demographer that I know of in the world. He can tell us about our populations and everything. So at this time, Dr. Zuberi. Brother, it's good to have you. Good to have you here. Thank you very much.
I want to thank Brother Molefi for that wonderful introduction. I wanted to start by thanking Vonnie Claire for being in my life. She has really been a powerful force in helping me have this, you always need these regenerative moments of renewing yourself. At least I'm always finding that. So I wanted to thank you for that. And also thank her for helping me with my talk today. And I wanted to thank MK Institute and my brother Molefi Asante and my sister Anna Asante for this wonderful invitation and opportunity. Whenever I talk around Molefi, and it hasn't been enough in these past four going on 5 decades, because I've been working with Molefi's work before I ever knew him. So I always tell this story about going in the library, Molefi can attest to this, and discovering his book on Afrocentrism. And at that moment, my own intellectual interaction with the academy was transformed. you know. So I can just say to you, I'm not like other demographers, and I don't want to be, okay? I'm not like other professors, and I don't want to be. In 2017, the International Union for the Scientific Study of Population, which is the largest scientific organization of demographers in the world, had their first meeting on the African continent in Cape Town. And they invited me to give the keynote address because of the work we have done on the African continent, especially with demography. And so it was there that I first introduced an idea I want to share with you all, and I'm going to try to get to it as quickly as I can, about Africa experiencing a demographic revolution. And at that, a demographic renaissance, I'm sorry. And at that moment, they all said, well, what do you mean exactly? Now, these are the demographers. And I was like, you know, it's all in the numbers, baby. Look at it. And it tells its story. And why it tells the story that it tells is what I want to talk to you all about. And I'm going to start with the demographics. And everything I show you, you can just get on the internet and type it and it'll pop up for you. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it is the base ground for understanding what I am saying. I mean, because part of what I want to say, and I'll give you my conclusion, Africa is not only going through this demographic renaissance at this moment, this rebirth of its population at this moment, but humanity depends on it. Our continuation depends on it. The way that we will advance civilization beyond these dark spaces depends on it. But to get there, Africa got to do some things too. This is the first one. It just shows you some basic numbers. I just want to give you what it is. This gives you the rate of population growth. It shows you how the population growth is going on. But you see that this line shows that the rate of population growth has been going down as the number of people have been going up. That's the way it works. So we're now at about 8 billion people. And by 2100, we'll be at about 10 billion people. And it's at this moment that we anticipate human population will begin to decline. But it's within from here till that point that the space and place that Africa plays in the world will do nothing but increase. But don't fret, we've been here before. Now, and the problem is when we were here before, we experienced what they called enslavement and the depopulation of Africa. And Africans were scattered all over Asia, and they were scattered all over Europe. So it's not that we haven't been here before, but we need to understand how we've gotten here and why we think the way we do. Now, the main reason Africa is the most important space is you see the dark color. Where the dark color is, those are the people who are having babies that contribute to the growth of the human population. Now, where the colors are light, and they're light in most of the world, those are places with under-replacement fertility. And you get under-replacement fertility when your average woman doesn't have more than 2 children. And then the population in the place you are at begins to decline. So that's most of Europe. That is the United States. That is most of Asia. That is most of the world is heading in that direction. The place that we anticipate this will hit last is Africa. And there are reasons for that. And we need to catch up to the physical reality of what Africa is experiencing and what it offers us. And just to give you a sense of how that works. Now, Africa is usually on the bottom of everything. So it has the highest infant mortality rates, and those rates are projected to continue unless we do things in Africa which will change that. If we do those things in Africa that will change that, then the number of Africans on the planet will increase even more, right? And that's the same thing with life expectancy. If Africa improves its life expectancy, then the number of Africans on the planet will increase even that much more than I'm going to be suggesting to you that they increase now. Okay. Now, this is the general view people have about Africa's population, that the fertility rates in parts of West Africa are as high as 7 children per mother. The experts say those rates will need to fall much closer to 2.1 children per mother, at which point population stabilizes to help spur growth and reduce poverty. Now, I'm going to try to explain to you why this is so fundamentally hateful and harmful for Africa. And it's very difficult to see it because they put it next to development. They put it next to progress. And they've been doing this ever since they did it. But if we follow the logic of how they reason, you'll end up at a space where you see that what appears to be logical is illogical. And that the growth of Africa's population and the growth of African diaspora populations in Brazil, in India, in the United States, all over the world, reckon a new way of thinking about the human future. So let me start, just so we all on the same page, what I mean by race. And I'm going to do it kind of fast, okay? Now, a long time ago, this dude, Cheikh Anta Diop, in this book, he had one of the last books that he published called Civilization or Barbarism. He said the monogenetic and African origin of humanity is becoming every day a more tangible fact. It took the Human Genome Project to prove him correct. We're almost at a point where we can say that is definitively a fact. And so everybody on the planet actually is part of the African diaspora. And that is. And I want to suggest to you, too, that race is not a system of color. They do not control the body that much, but they do control the mind. So even they got us thinking illogical about the physicality of the thing they call race. So they, for example, will tell us that you got black people here and you got white people here, and then somehow if you mix them together, they're going to give you brown people. But they shouldn't give you brown people. It's illogical that they give you brown people. The logical thing we should say they're giving us is gray people. But we don't call those people gray because they don't appear to us to be gray. In fact, they're not. And the reason they appear to us to be black has something to do with the original genetics of humanity which come out of Africa, where you already had the various shades of humanity in existence in Africa before the migration of Africans to Asia and then to Europe. That's right. So I would suggest to you that the thing they call race is a social construction to facilitate inequality. Race is about colonialism. Race is about enslavement. And it was only about 500 years ago that they were able to introduce these ideas and concepts in the ways that they do. Not that they didn't look at some people who were in their spaces and say these black people, these Africans are black. That is not something that they didn't do. They did that, but they didn't control the world at those moments. And so they didn't have the ability of implementing a system of racial stratification, of racial domination, even if they could do some racial identification. But their system of racial identification about 500 years ago began to take over everything. Now, I want to suggest that this idea, that view I gave you about demography, about Africa's population as being a problem for Africa, that, it's just wrong to do it. Now, if we had a time, I'd talk to you about what happened to China, taking the advice of the world that they are having too many babies. Now, China is experiencing population decline. China needs, like Japan, people to migrate there to work because their policies of reducing the fertility in their population has resulted in depopulation, in decline. All right. So, what is demography? I'm going to take a moment to try to break that down. Is that all right, Now, this is a balancing equation. You can find it online if you want to. And if you're into that, and I'm into that kind of thing, so I have to run these equations through my head. Now, the reason it's called a balancing equation is because that is an idea that you find often in physics, that there are physical systems which are balanced. And so it is the physical knowledge that you have something which you can understand. This is, in fact, the power of demography and why it can predict so far ahead. You saw me, I just showed you predictions of the population into 2100. So this kind of alternative way of thinking about the now in terms of the future is an idea which demography allows societies to do. And this is the basic equation that's used there. Now, there's assumptions here, and that's the problem. And so the assumptions is that a population of a fixed location increases only by births or by immigration and diminishes only by deaths or immigration. But this problem becomes this assumption, and I'm calling it an assumption. First of all, y'all got to understand, for demographers, calling this an assumption is already a violation of principle number one. That's why I told you I ain't like other demographers. So I'm saying that that is an assumption, that it only grows or declines based on these ways. And there is a way inside of a population, inside of a space, inside of a nation state, in which there is reassignment of identity or assignment of identity, which violates this and makes it a political prescription. And there's no way and no place for these politics in the pure numbers. Y'all with me? Okay. Now, here is something where that's not true. This is a simple pendulum. And it's a mechanical system that moves in an oscillatory motion. It consists of a point mass m, right, suspended by the means of light, inextensible, that is incapable of being stretched, with a string of length L from a fixed point as shown here. So I'm saying, this equation that I'm showing you now, that measures that. Okay, and you don't have to worry about this measurement, this thing being wrong. It is defined by the elements that are in it. And what I'm trying to tell you is demography is not like that. Okay, so if you want something that's like that to compare it to, it should do that, but it should also follow these same criteria. And so why isn't this true in demography? Because we usually do not work with simple functional relationships. We have instead a probabilistic relation. Now, I know probabilistic relations, and that has its problem once you introduced Africa and once you introduce the people. That's this book I wrote called Thicker Than Blood, How Racial Statistics Lie. So we have in demography a relation that expresses the probability that a given value of one variable will be encountered among many cases with given characteristics. For example, race and place of birth. These things, although they seem very clear, are dependent on a political definition. So what happens in the post-enslavement and the post-colonial racial definitions of population? This is where we reach the fundamental problems. So in human demography, population is the critical term. Now, the word around which the field evolves, that is, population is what demography is about. So the formal methods that I just talked to y'all about, don't worry, I ain't gonna show you no more equations, but you can look them up online if you want it, and you can read some of my other books, and I got a lot of them in it. But it denotes the power to define an intellectual space consisting of a related social, cultural, political, economic, and visual meaning. Okay, I grew up in Oakland, all right? And I grew up during the time of the Panther Party. So I got my first sickle cell anemia test there. I got my first political education there, all right? That's where I got. So I remember some of the things, because they would be telling us all kind of stuff. And some of the stuff I learned that Huey Newton was saying, because this brother was smart. And he said, there are two aspects of power. The power to define a phenomena and the power to manipulate the phenomena thus defined. Don't that sound like one of those proclamations in the Panther Party? You know, me, my little self up in there with that leather coat them brothers gave me and that tat. Well, I was ready for it. So this ability to define the population is a fundamental aspect of the nation state. That's why demography begins with the creation of the nation state. And demographic concepts are then politicized by this notion of the nation state. So you go from that definition, right, to kind of Malthus talking about, Reverend Thomas Malthus talking about population, to Darwin trying to talk about population and evolution, to Darwin's cousin Galton inventing eugenics and still talking about population, to his handing it off to demographers who end up talking about population control. Y'all understand that trajectory? All right, let me try to lay it down a little bit more. So I'm going to try to suggest to you all that what we have to do is we have to reject the ontological and fixed existence of racial identities, because all humans migrated out of Africa. We may want to know what happened to them when they migrated out of Africa and the different trajectories, both intellectually and physically, that they took as a consequence of that. However, never forget, a mother shouldn't forget her children, right? And you need to understand them, even if they go wild and start destroying the environment and fighting wars all over the place, you still might want to understand them. That's right. So this rejection implies several redirections in our research. I'm suggesting that we engage in a form of social science that has as its objective the advance of humanity and the environment. That beyond disciplines towards a consilience between the humanities and social statistics and all these other forms of knowledge in order to advance humanity. Not recognizing these limitations has rendered social statistics as a type of propaganda to support various conjectures, various theories about human behavior and society. And you cannot forget, it's only a little while ago that they started believing that black people were human. Y'all understand that? And some of them are still debating it, whether you're human or not. So you don't want to forget that. Let me give you a visual example to let y'all know. I'm very deep into a tradition, right? This is the tradition that led to the writing of the Tariqs, Tariq al-Sudan and Timbuktu, Tariq al-Fatish and Timbuktu, all these folks, right? And so this is one of the first graphs, figures of racial divisions in the United States that was made in 1890. And what it shows is the different racial groups, and it shows them their proportion of the U.S. population over time. The group that's missing is the Native Americans. I mean, because the whole assumption of their lack of humanity was a fundamental part of the creation of the field, the discipline of demography. The lack of humanity of black people was an essential part of the field of demography. And I'm telling you, I'm not really hating on demography because I'm a demographer, but the reality is that demography has been more political than not. And as a consequence of that, the logic of it has been perverted by those politics. And in a way, those politics lead to making a picture like this. So this is 1890. By the time Du Bois took a look at the same data in 1900, he made this figure for an exhibit that he was doing in Paris. And in this figure, the thing you got to, if you want to see, look at this the way I did, you almost have to compare how this guy has drawn such nice and pretty lines. Y'all see those nice, pretty lines? And then Du Bois came and he didn't draw no lines. All this stuff is fuzzy and bleeding into each other. And he wrote one paper, he said 20% of the white population is black. Based on your definition of what black is, not based on my definition of what black is. He said 20% of the white population is black. Now, if you do the math on that, if the 20% that they claimed and the 15% that we claimed, and then you do the math on it, already you got a lot more people passing than we thought. And that's the reality of it, because the passing is a consequence of an idea. And you can't mathematically express that using the equations that I showed you, because it won't work, because it's a political idea. Now, some of this comes out of an era that Malthus made. So, and you can look at the logic of the era and understand how it's an easy fix. But first, you got to open your mind to even seeing the possibility of it. And he argued that the primacy of nature, the composition of the population over political culture. Something is objective about the composition of the population. Right? And so I showed you how for demographers, that's a mathematical equation. So Malthus's population principle argued that the propensity for population growth to outstrip the means of subsistence, population growth, and the problem of scarcity. Y'all understand? It's a fundamental idea. That was the fundamental idea the guy was expressing from the Bloomberg. So the propensity strained and threaten the morals and the happiness of mass society. It's a moral question. Now, and this is Benjamin Franklin. And basically what Benjamin Franklin does is he forgets two things. One, the Native American population was in America before they came to colonize it. But there's a colonial and enslaving assumption there's a colonial and enslaving assumption among most population scientists when they reflect on history. They think just like he did. They talk about the growth of the European population at the expense of everybody else in the Americas except for the Europeans here. And they very cavalierly mention the importation of large numbers of Africans to come and do the rigorous labor which becomes the foundation of colonization. And now here he's talking to the royalty of Britain, because he's talking about the United States when there was no United States. It was the 13 colonies, and the 13 colonies were part of the British Empire. So this was really him writing a letter to the British Empire. But somebody could have wrote a similar letter from Brazil, a similar letter from Colombia, a similar letter from Jamaica, a similar letter from Cuba, a similar letter from India. You understand? In all of these colonial spaces. So that a fundamental premise in demography starts with that. So that's where Malthus got the idea from. And then he elaborates on this idea in his work. And then in 1838, Charles Darwin, in his biography, he writes about how he got his idea about the struggle of the species and the struggle for survival, how he got that idea from Malthus. Charles Darwin got his idea about it from Malthus. And then Malthus's cousin would champion his idea that evolution needs proceed by acting on what is continuous variation, more or less. Now that's important because that was the biostatistical argument about how humans inherited the characteristics from their ancestors. All right, y'all with me? Yeah. Okay. I didn't hear a lot of years there, so I'm gonna slow it down a notch. All right. So Galton, in his arguments, then he focused on a system of positive race improvement. His idea of eugenics focused on ways to increase the breeding of the most fit individuals of the white race. He argued that eugenics would produce a true meritocracy rather than the old class conscious based on tradition and inheritance. Y'all understand? Mm-hmm. So he's talking about you need to better improve the white population as time goes on. And forget about the other ones. They will kill themselves, right? And this is the same thing Malthus had said as well. Malthus had said, don't give nothing to the poor, don't give nothing to the Africans, don't give nothing to the Chinese. Let them just go ahead. They're going to run out because we got modern society now. They won't know how to function in it, and they will die. So now the eugenics movement in the US and later Germany was negative and focused on ways to reduce the presence of inferior individuals within the population. So they had sterilization programs in California, just like they had sterilization programs in Nazi Germany. Okay, so population control, a major idea among demographers, which follows World War II, because you can't go around talking about eugenic sterilization of the society anymore. You got to clean that up. They start talking about population control. And population control maintained this focus with a new rhetoric of development that encourages the reduction of fertility as a way for Africans and Asians to develop individually and socially. Y'all get it? Okay, you want to develop, have less people. And at the same time, though, they paying white women in Europe to have babies and arguing for them to have babies. And they're telling people in Africa not to have babies. Okay, let me just kind of keep it systematic. So there was a limit to eugenics, and Du Bois was arguing against those limits by arguing with the eugenists. You know, at a time, he wasn't saying, I'm not arguing with you all because we want to marry your daughters. This is what he said in this public debate he had in Chicago that I'm showing you things. He's debating with this guy, Stoddard, who was a big-time eugenist. And he's arguing with him, it's not because we want miscegenation, right? That's not why we are opposed to eugenics. We are opposed to eugenics because you all propose killing us. You all propose that we cannot have an equal share to the resources on earth because you are superior and everything should be guided towards you. Okay. Now, I'm going to give you something quick about this whole demography thing so you can put this whole thing in a context that puts us where we are. Am I doing okay on time? All right. In traditional societies, fertility and mortality are high. Okay. Social construction of populations between the colonized and the colonizer, model of competition towards genocide. So you got to understand. So Britain, at the moment of its imperial height, had more Africans and more Indians under its political and economic control. That was colonization. They used to joke about that at international affairs, about how they had more colored people in Britain than the United States, than any country on the planet Earth. Now, when they went to count people, however, they didn't count them. They controlled them. They dominated them without representation, mind you, and they took the resources out of Africa wantonnly at their own demand. So that in their way of looking at Africa as a traditional society, it was Africa as a traditional society stuck in a mode of life that was inferior to the mode of life that Africa was providing the rest of the world. So in modern societies, it's argued, fertility and mortality are low, and modern societies are the colonizers. Right? Let that sit in there. And the postmodern and post-center of the colony states and corporations. I'm sorry, those are the modern people, but that's the modern. Now, in between there is the demographic transition, which is a result of the colonial competition for resources on the planet. Now, I'm telling you this, and don't get me wrong. This is not what demographers say. This is what Brother Tukufu is trying to say to you all and trying to say to them as well, because it's what I said at that meeting in Cape Town a couple of years ago. So conjecture of demographic transition. You could put theory where I say conjecture, because all theory is conjecture. The description of changes over time in fertility and mortality, the construction of theoretical causal models explaining these changes, and the predictions for future changes, especially in the so-called developing world. And so it starts out where birth rates are high and death rates are low, okay? And then it moves to where birth rates are high, people are continuing to have 6 or 7 babies, and the mortality falls. And this is when the total population you see here begins to go up and the death rate begins to go down. And the birth rate is pretty steady, but it begins to decline much slower than the death rate. And so in here is where you get all this growth in the population. And then in the third stage, you got a falling birth rate that's falling dramatically, but it falls, the death rate begins to fall more slowly. And that's what these lines are basically showing. And then in the fourth stage, you get low birth rates and low death rates. And that's what you have today among most of those populations. Everybody but the brown ones on my map. Y'all remember my map back there? So all those blue places, that's what they are right now. And only Africa and a couple of countries in Asia are the exception. And then the fifth state, the final state, is when the birth rates begin to fall, and when the birth rates begin to all fall below replacement, and the death rates are already low. And that's when you get what we have now. And what do we have now? We have basically a big aging population. Okay? And so when they say the population is aging, what they mean by that is more people are surviving to be old and less babies are being born. And that leads to the phenomena of the society as a whole becoming older in its age. So the aging society. So the human population is aging. Not all national populations are aging at the same time and the rate. And herein lies how African countries continue to shape the world. According to the data behind the demographic transition theory, population aging is a problem. Let's turn our attention to how Africa offers a demographic solution, okay? The future is Africa. And all the stuff I'm showing you comes from 2017, but nothing really has changed. The patterns are still the same. Okay, whether Africa's population patterns are a problem or a period of renaissance is a question of morality and perspective. Y'all see, I now basically gave you a definition of why and how this guy can say Africa needs to stop having so many babies. Okay? All right. First, let me kind of give y'all what I think a demographic renaissance is. I think renaissance as a term is just perfect for this moment for Africa. And also a lot of African diaspora populations too, but that's another whole conversation. So from my point of view, the demographic renaissance is characterized by a rebirth of a population after a prolonged period of decline or decimation. I offer that humanity experienced such demographic renaissance among the so-called native population in the Americas, Africa, Asia, and elsewhere following the decimation of their populations during the periods of colonialism and enslavement. So the African demographic renaissance refers to the rebirth of the African population following the decline and decimation of colonialism and enslavement. It is a period in African civilization that is marked by a revival of people on the African continent. The period is also marked by the growth of the African representation among the working age population on the planet, and the growth of the African representation among the working age population. So I can visually present the African demographic decimation following the 15th century. I can visually identify the nadir of this decline in the 19th century. And I can reliably present the African demographic rebirth in the 20th and the 21st century. This rebirth is also characterized by the spread of an invigorating migration of Africans today around the globe, from China to Brazil, Europe, the United States of America, and elsewhere, via either labor migration or indentured servitude. You know, that's a lot of what we see going on the border when the coyote brings somebody over and the people be here and be paying the coyote up for 10 years and stuff. Y'all know about that. That be happening a lot in the community, especially go talk to the folks in the Northeast. They'll tell you about it. And other forms of draining the continent of its people power. Consequently, this period is marked by these things. Now, here's Africa's growth, and Africa is a significant part of the human population forever. And if you take my whole lead, it is the human population. But now I'm talking about that population of Africans that live on the African continent. And so what you see here is Africa is steadily going up in its percent of the human population. And then we have this period, and this is even with the enslavement to Asia, the Arab slave trade, the so-called trans-Saharan slave trade, which was just as big as the European slave trade. Okay, and so, but once the European slave trade hits Africa, the population as it's represented on Earth begins to dramatically decline. Okay, and it declines all the way to about 1850. Now, here, the slave trade is all but gone. Colonization and settler colonization and indirect colonization is beginning to take over the entire continent. And there is when Africa's population kind of reaches a pretty stable point. Okay, I'm not going to give you the period in between here and 1950. I'm just going to go here because I want to spend a little more time talking about this demographic renaissance idea that I've just suggested to you. So here you see it. Can y'all see see that chart is going up? This is the Renaissance, okay? This is the rebirth of the African population on the African continent. Ain't nothing gonna stop it. It's a force in itself. The wars are not stopping it. The famine is not stopping it. AIDS didn't stop it. These things COVID didn't stop it. This growth is continuing. These things which you see are blip, just a little blip. And here's the thing. So demographers do their thing and they're very sure of what they do for the next 30 years. That's why I'm looking at that next 30 years with a lot of attention and trying to show it to you to say that this is basically going to happen, that this demographic renaissance is going to happen. And here is it even in a little more extreme way. It is the demographic renaissance of the African population among those people who do most of the work. And those are these people in their prime in these age groups. Okay? Yeah, I'm 64 now, so, you know, I'm with this group, but but y'all understand what I'm saying? And then Africa is also, there's a migration out of Africa and across Africa. Most of it is in Africa. So that's of the 40.2 million African migrants in 2019, 53% of them migrated to other African countries. 26% of them migrated to Europe, 8% to North America, 11% to Asia, and the other 5 or so percent to other parts in the world. These numbers will increase. That's what you get with this demographic change that's happening on planet Earth. Last year, Japan's population declined. It would not have had the workforce it needed but for immigration. There are places in China which are now receiving large percentages of African immigrants. Okay, so this is not really something that you have to wait on. It's happening now. So, and if you go to the next 50 years, the basic thing is about the same. And that's what you see here. So this is basically looking up into 2100, showing you see the rise in the green? That's Africa. Okay? So Africa just continues to be a major part of the human population. Okay, now this is really important because what this shows you, if you look at it, is that really we don't have a population decline problem on planet Earth. We have a problem in recognizing the potential of Africa to contribute to the planet Earth. Now, the thing is that this is not the first time this happened. Back during the period in 1500, these were the numbers for Africans in terms of their percentage in the population. And labor was needed everywhere in the world. Labor was needed in Brazil. Labor was needed in the United States. Labor was needed in Europe. And so rather than ship Europeans to other parts of the world, they kept the Europeans there and they shipped the Africans to help cultivate the resources and the cotton and the gold and the silver and the sugar and the tobacco in the Americas and ship it back for the development of Europe. Y'all understand what I'm saying? So African population being essential for human progress and development is nothing new. So it is a question of perspective. Like I say, and mine is quite different. Africa must visualize itself as a solution to the problem of population aging and decline. We got to understand that. Now, the problem is, that can get all mixed up and you can end back up in chains or in other forms of marginalization if you're not on top of that and how you're going to engage with that. Africa, and look at where we are right now, right? Think about it. Touch your phone. Everybody touch your phone. It don't mean nothing if Africa ain't in that mix. You don't have it if Africa ain't in that mix. So it's not like Africa is not part of the industrial revolution, of the technological revolution. Africa is essential to that revolution. And you don't have Coltrane, you don't have your phone. You don't have the quantity of gold they have, you don't have your phone. You don't have the diamonds, the industrial diamonds making those precise cuts. You don't have your phone. So you got those things because of that. We just need to change the perspective of what contributions are being made and how people are being paid for those contributions. African civilization must challenge the world to recognize its rebirth by a cultural, educational, economic, political rebirth to match the African demographic renaissance. All right, thank y'all very much.
Brother, will you take a few questions?
Yes.
Hotel. Wow. Boy, that was something, wasn't it? Yeah. Wow. I would tell you. I was sitting there like, wow, this is so powerful. Thank you so much, brother. Let's give him another applause. Thank you. Let's give Vanna Claire applause. Thank you. We have a time for a couple of questions. One of so many questions came to my mind about this, given the fact that I have heard that in a country like Niger and some other countries in Africa, you do have the highest birth rates going on now in some of the West African countries. But the question I wanted to ask to start this off is, given the fact that the longevity, the life expectancy is also relatively low at this time, how would that impact the idea of the birth rate and the death rate?
Okay. So the dynamics work. So if the life expectancy is low and the birth rate is high, that's when you see the population growing. So Niger's population is growing. Now, here's the interesting thing about Niger. So, because one question may be, how do you take care of all these young babies? But even Niger's population is aging. It's just aging much slower. But the thing about Niger is an extremely, extremely wealthy country. Niger is one of the most wealthiest countries in the world. And this is how you know that. Y'all remember that Niger recently kicked the French out economically. Now, here's a strange thing. Overnight, they took over the uranium industry and became one of the fastest growing economies on the planet. Y'all get that? That's how the dynamics in Africa are so fundamentally powerful. They kicked the French out, took over the price of uranium. What they did is the French were giving them a couple of cents for each portion of uranium, and they were selling it for $203 or something like that. And so they simply changed the price of the uranium coming out of their country to $203. Mm-hmm. And so that caused a reversal in the economic profile of the country. You understand? Now, it took a military coup to do it because there was a lot of people making a lot of money, not the Niger people, from the prices being the way that they were. So there needs to be that renegotiation, because that renegotiation will fundamentally transform the quality of life in Niger. And once you transform the quality of life, you get longevity. You get a better ability to survive to be older. You get a better ability to survive out of the period of high risk as a baby. And so once you kind of do those two things, that contributes to the aging of the population. So you can expect that, given this new consciousness about the economy of Niger that now they have, that the life going forward should increase, should improve. And that's what I'm saying. But here, the demographic renaissance is happening in Niger. The big thing Niger has to do is catch up with that demographic renaissance, with its educational renaissance, with its cultural renaissance. People talk about things like decolonization. They need to decolonize the politics, decolonize the culture, decolonize the education, decolonize all kinds of aspects of the society in order to usher in a space and a way to take advantage of this new place, this new platform.
Yeah, well, thank you, Professor, for your talk. Well, it's an honor for me because I'm learning about these topics. Indeed, in Colombia, I never learned about Africa. Most of the things I have learned about Africa have been in this institute. And now that I think that you answered part of my question at the end of your answer. But when I have thought with people some friends that I have from Africa, they have said that we talk a lot here about political situations or about these issues about the African Renaissance and the empowerment of Africa, but it's not the same in their countries, where still there are some political issues that don't let the countries advance, but I don't know too much about it. So I mean, my question is when you were talking about the perspective that you say that Africa is the future of humanity, is does the country they know, or in Africa they know that, this reality or this project of saving humanity and if are they doing something in this way? You know what I mean?
Yes, yes. I want to say that I really appreciated working with the PCNA a few years ago. I took a film that I had done on African independence, and we toured the country. And we went all over. We went to illegal mining operations. We went to where people were not able to move away from growing cocaine. We went deep in where sisters were mining gold and using the same Ghanaian techniques that they brought over to the place, and all of this. And then I had an opportunity to sit with the vice president at a meeting. They were having a meeting on Pan-Africanism in Cali. And I was sitting there with the vice president, not the current vice president, that sister, but I was sitting there with him, and I was talking about her because I had met her in the community where she organized, where they were panning for the gold. And he said, well, what is the connection between Africa and the black population in Colombia? And I said, well, here's like a clear economic relationship that you can relate to. Anglo-America is taking the gold mining facilities of the sisters and the brothers in Colombia, and they're doing the same thing in Ghana. Now, if you can't see the Pan-African collections between that and their connection to the mining of gold in South Africa, then we got the wrong idea of what Pan-Africanism can be about and what a renewal, a rebirth of our consciousness about Africa can contribute to solutions of the problems that we have. And so, in essence, what I am trying to suggest is that the demographic renaissance is already happening. And it is not dependent much on what we can do. It's already based on what we have done. Okay? mainly what sisters have done by continuing to have children.
I didn't know demographics could be so controversial, but obviously it can be.
Yeah.
And you answered part of my first question about the pandemics and wars in terms of depopulation of Africa. So you answered that question. But have you heard of the Great Reset, the Great Resetters and that sort of thing?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
that's why I'm arguing against those people.
Exactly.
I just didn't give them no time.
you know that Pandemic X is coming.
Yeah.
And Pandemic X is targeting younger people as
Yeah.
opposed to the COVID targeting older people. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I guess part of my question is, do you think then that because the great studies are not going to rest until they implement their program? So that's part of my question. And question number two is, can we change the perspective of African culture without a strong military? Because you mentioned part of that already.
Well, I think I would suggest that we need to have a renaissance in our thinking about the role of the military. I wrote a little book called African Independence, How Africa Shapes the World. And one of the things I tried to argue is that this is one of these resources which has always been a part of African independence, African political affairs, because of their education back then and their strategic positioning in African societies over, ever since the period of independence. So we do need a kind of new kind of a military leadership which is conscious of this need for these renaissance. I mean, the world today, ever since Ike, y'all remember that president, right? And his first dude hanging out with NATO, creating NATO, putting its mission in motion. But when he left office, he was the one who said, there's something happening here in America that you cannot stop. We have to have it. And it's called the creation of the military-industrial complex. It was from Ike said that. And he said, don't worry, it's going to affect everything in the society. And you have to have it because you're going to have now a standing military that is global and planetary. And that's what you have now. You have over 1,000 U.S. military bases all over the world. So the idea of the military-industrial complex is there. It's been implemented, and it's been an essential component of the U.S. economy, an essential component of the U.S. economy. It is now, we see, become an essential component of the Russian economy. Russia is engaging in this war despite all these sanctions because it has a military-industrial complex. I mean, that's just what it is. And it is what it is. And in fact, there is a call for the rest of the world to join in these military industrial complexes, which are interlinked with the U.S. military industrial complex. This is not even a secret. I mean, when a president is announcing this is the way we're going to shift, and then you just got to follow the trajectory. Unfortunately for us, a critical component of the military-industrial complex is the prison-industrial complex.
All right, we have two questions from our live stream. So just want to...
So we have... All right, this is from live stream. Virgilette Gaffin has asked that Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are in the news for reasons you mentioned. Closing embassies and dropping the French. Where are Benin, Ivory Coast, and Senegal in this sale process?
So if we start by just taking Senegal, for example, the political turmoil in Senegal revolves around some of this, right? When you have one of the countries which has had the closest allegiance with the French military in Senegal. That's just a historical fact. And I don't think their military has been in any way shying away from this legacy or this history. There are legendary movies made by African filmmakers about this relationship and the legacy of this relationship and how much it has meant to France. But the political turmoil has to do with some of the rising voice of different elements in Senegalese society who are demanding a revamp of the relationship of Senegal with France. Now, if you couple all of this into this idea of decolonizing aspects of the society, you're going to have to, at some point, decolonize the aspect of the military. Because the military has to follow this desire for the people for more of a democratic say in their government and for more of a participation in the future. So the young brother who they let out of jail recently, Sonko. He was put in jail, and basically because he's making a different kind of political noise. And when people make these different kinds of political noise, you watch what happens to them. They'll end up in jail waiting out the election. And so the people demanded an election, and they made a lot of noise about him not being able to participate in the election. So I think that all of these other countries that you mentioned in your question, that they are equally involved in this transformation, in the demand for the transformation. Because first of all, the youth of the population is growing as a more mature youth. That's part of the aging in Africa. They're not the old, but they're the young and mature and working or wanting to work and having received some education and wanting to receive the benefits of that, having this whole legacy that they know the whole world looks at Senegal and say, wow, y'all produce some of the greatest intellects at Cheikh Anta Diop University. How does that reflect in your say in the society? So I think it's on the way. And I'm hoping that this moment is seized by Africa, because that's what I'm saying. The demographic renaissance is going to happen in all three of those countries. The real question is, can we match that demographic renaissance with a political, an economic, a military, all these other renaissances?
Last question.
All right, it's the last question that we'll take. There was a lot of participation. This one is from Mutu from Paris. He says that in his questions he's asking, he's saying that his question was more about Africa. How should Africa challenge the world to recognize its rebirth by a cultural, educational, to match the African demographic renaissance, as Dr. Zuberi said?
First, I think that's the real question is the world has to match Africa's commitment to its own renaissance. See, because right now, you can imagine the United States is concerned because the Niger just cut its relationship with its military, just like it did with the French. And so the U.S. has to be reconsidering how is it going to deal with this kind of rebirth of Africans thinking that they can run their own show. So how do you talk to these people who we've been accustomed to telling what their interest is in order for them to develop, now turning the corner and said, no, it doesn't work that easily. We need to have, as Mandela said when he visited the White House, we need a new relationship. You can't come and tell us what you need. We need to discuss what the future will be. Yes. Thank you.
Oh boy, that's wonderful. This is great. Well, it seems to me, as certainly as an Afrocentrist, that what we are talking about is an Afrocentric turn in Africa, where Africa sees its own interests as significant and exercises its own agency. So it's wonderful. It's a beautiful lecture. It's a beautiful audience that we've had internationally. And we want people to know that our next program, Sister Joyce, is just 1 minute here. No, it's the next is the next. Well, we have two things. We have several things that we need to announce. One is that the Pathfinders is having they're actually taking a tour that. And Brother Carlton, I think, Brother Tugu, would you ask Sister Anna for the schedule for, yeah. But that tour that is happening is going to be, I think, in the States, and that is the Pathfinders are doing that. All right, thank you very much. But the next presentation is, wow, the next presentation is Yesenia Escobar, who is from Colombia. She asked a question. And Yesenia, I heard her yesterday. She was at Penn. By the way, at Penn, you know, they lock the doors. You can't get in unless you have some sort of Penn card. Yeah. And I went over to hear her yesterday or 2 days ago, and had a hard time getting in the building. So I just want you tell them we're not gonna mess with y'all. I know how Penn is over there. I said at Temple, at least we just have a security guard inside the building. So you can discuss, but at Penn, the door's locked. We couldn't get in. But Yesenia gave an incredible presentation over there at Penn in the Department of Philosophy, and so she's going to be speaking here on March the 31st on Afro-Colombian literature, how Africans see the world in Colombia, and we're looking forward to that presentation. She's just a dynamic sister. So then, and then on the April the 14th, Dr. Patricia Reed Merritt will be talking about Fannie Lou Hamer and activism, making warriors. So we'll be listening out for her. In the meantime, next week, actually this week, the 22nd, Friday, at 6 p.m., at the Imani Fellowship at 3901 Westfield Avenue in Camden, we will have the incredible new film on Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe, A Great Soul, will be aired at 6 p.m., and I am one of the special guests commenting on this film. So I will be there in Camden at 6 p.m., March the 22nd, at the Imani Fellowship, 3901 Westfield. I thank all of you for coming and being here. We have so many outstanding people come to this program, and we want to encourage you to keep coming and keep working in the interest of the African people. We call upon our ancestors, far and near, the mother of our mothers, the father of our fathers, to render mercy and to bear witness for the liberation and the victory of all oppressed people forever. And we say it is done. Ashe. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.